Hi, everyone. My name is Madhura, and it's my pleasure to be your MC today for this next segment of the Intermediate and Advanced Spring track. I hope you've enjoyed all the talks so far. Our next presenter is Dan Vega, and Dan is going to talk to us about full stack development with Vue.js and Spring Boot. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dan.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get into it. All right, so welcome to this session, Full Stack Java Development with Spring Boot and VueJS. My name is Dan Vega. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a second, but first, there's a link at the bottom of this slide. If you can't see it, I'll go ahead and spell it out for you. danvega.dev/spring-1-2021. That link will take you to an article that I have written up on today's session. It will include a link to my GitHub repository that contains all of the slides for today, all of the code that we're going to walk to, and then, of course, my website, danvega.dev. You can find all of my contact info over there if you want to ask me any questions about today's presentation. So with that, we have a lot to cover, so let's get into it. So again, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me first. First and foremost, I'm a husband and a father. There's my beautiful wife, Jen, our two little girls, Juliana and Isabella, and this is us in Hilton Head earlier this year, finally being able to travel, which was really exciting. The smiles on our face says it all. So just really proud of those two little girls right there, and really happy to be their father. So exciting times with them ahead, I'm sure. So next up, I want to talk about what I'm doing day to day. So I'm an enterprise Java architect at Briebug. So first off, we are hiring. So if you're interested, please reach out to me. We work on some really cool projects for some of the biggest companies in the world. Two of our big clients are Fortune 50 companies, one of which is the largest logistics company in the world. And we do some really cool stuff with them. Working on Spring Cloud applications, Spring Boot, microservices, just a whole Spring ecosystem of products. And as I said, we get to work on some really cool projects. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and reach out to me. I live in Rocky River, which is right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. I call Cleveland home. Big fan of Cleveland everything. So if you're ever in the area and you need some tips on where to go, I think it's one of those underrated cities in America. If you have a chance to visit it, it gets a bad rap, but as soon as people visit it, they absolutely fall in love with it like I have. I'm also a Cleveland sports fan, which is why I'm usually in a bad mood. But maybe not this year. The Browns look good. So hopefully, if you're ever in town for a Browns game, please hit that for that too. So I've been writing software. I've been a software developer for a little over 20 years now. And I think one of the biggest takeaways that I have from being a software developer is one thing I really love to do is create content. So I found early on that I really enjoyed writing. I created a blog over on a website that is not this one anymore, but a long time ago. But it gave me a chance to really get into some blog software, set up my own website. And, at the time, I'm kind of dating myself here. There wasn't all the resources that we have today, like Stack Overflow and GitHub. There was, if you had a problem, you really had to hunt and find a solution. And so I found it, really helpful to be able to go ahead and write about my experiences and hopefully help someone at the same time. So I really enjoyed that. Didn't know that it would last this long, but I've been blogging probably 15 years. I've written over 1,000 articles. That has led me into other facets of content creation. I started a YouTube channel. I ended up creating a course after I came home from Spring 1 back in 2016, where the first time I saw Spring Boot, I'd heard about it, but I didn't really see it and see all the sessions that I saw at Spring Boot. And I came on and said, oh my gosh, this is like going to be the biggest thing ever. I gotta create a course on this to help everybody get up and running. To date, that is still my biggest course. And now I have, like 8 courses, over 140,000 students worldwide, which is really cool to see. So If you're interested in any of that, I have tons of free material over at danvega.dev. You can get all my contact info over there. So go ahead and check that out. So now let's talk about what we are here to talk about, and that is Spring Boot and VueJS. I can't tell you how excited I am to talk about two of my favorite frameworks. I'm a lazy web developer, and both of these frameworks are enablers. What they do is they provide the plumbing and the infrastructure that allows me to focus on solving problems, like the problems at hand, not worrying about all of that other stuff. I just get in and I write Java on the Spring side, or Kotlin or Groovy, and I write JavaScript on the Vue.js side. I'm not writing like trying to figure out how to stand something up from the ground up. I'm really focusing in on the business requirement, right? So let's start with Spring. How many of you out there get this excited when you see start.spring.io, as Josh says, the second best page on the internet? What I want to do is, I know this is a Spring conference. I also know this is a free conference where a lot of people are probably attending for other tracks. And so if they happen to stop by, I just want to give a quick overview of Spring. There was a really great presentation this morning by Glenn on an overview of what is Spring. So if you get a chance to catch that replay in a few days, please do so. That was awesome. But I'm just going to give a real high overview for anyone who might be here on the Vue.js side. So one of the things that I love is Spring makes hard things easy to do. So when it starts, Spring's focus on speed, simplicity, and productivity has made it one of the most popular Java, or the world's most popular Java framework. And so let's start with that. What is a framework? Well, a framework is really there to provide a solution to problems when you're building applications. So the Spring framework is an open source framework. As I said, the world's most popular Java framework. We can also use languages like Kotlin and Groovy. You can use whatever build tools you like, Maven or Gradle. And then we ask the question, well, what can Spring do for me? What types of applications am I going to start to build? Well, the most popular are probably web applications. You can use traditional Spring MVC, which if you're coming from any other language, it uses a traditional model view controller framework. So you should be able to pick it up pretty quickly. We can also build reactive web applications using Spring Webflux and Netty. You can build cloud applications. So if you want to be in a distributed world, things like microservices and serverless. And then in that distributed world, how are you going to talk to each of these microservices, maybe using REST or event-driven? So there are so many things that Spring can help you do. So we're here talking about Spring Boot. If that's Spring, what is Spring Boot? So Spring Boot is really just an opinionated way of building Spring applications. And it really starts with start.spring.io. This is kind of the kickstart to your applications. I like to consider this, so on the right side, you have your dependencies. So if you were going to host, let's say, Thanksgiving dinner, and you wanted to put together a list of things that you were going to cook, you would probably jot down a bunch of ingredients that you would need to cook those particular items. So you go to the store and you start going through the aisles and you start picking off the shelves those ingredients that you're going to need to make that meal. Well, here, those dependencies are the same things. If we're going to build a web application, we're probably going to need the web dependency. If we want caching, we're going to pull in some caching dependencies. If we want to talk to a database and so on. So these dependencies are the items that are going to help us build our application. So start.spring.io makes that real easy. It's built into a lot of IDEs and editors, and that just makes getting off the ground so much easier. I've done a little bit of Spring framework application development back in the day before Boot, and this really kind of simplifies that. So what does that give us, though? Well, it gives us things like starter dependencies. And these dependencies are going to allow us to not have to worry about managing all of the dependencies that it takes to build something. So on the right here in this picture, you see that we've included the Spring Web starter. Now that starter is not just one dependency. This is saying that, hey, if you're going to build a web application, these are probably the things that you're going to need to build a web application. You probably need some type of server. So we'll give you an embedded version of Tomcat. You're probably going to do some marshaling of data. So we'll include Jackson and a whole bunch more, right? So not only that, but it figures out which versions of these libraries work well together. That is one of the biggest things that, it's a pain in the butt to try and figure out on your own. And this grows in complexity as your application goes. Then it gives us things like auto configuration. If you're going to include a database, we're probably going to configure you a bean for a data source. And also gives you things for production ready features like metrics and health checks and externalized configuration. And then there's so much more, right? If you go over to spring.io and look at all the projects, these are just the Spring projects. So if you realize that you're working on your application and you need to solve for a particular problem like data persistence, you can reach for Spring Data. If you need to go ahead and secure something, you can go ahead and reach for Spring Security. If you want to build distributed applications, you reach for something like Spring Cloud. And not only this, but the community at large is just so many great projects built around the Spring framework. So that's Spring. So now, what about VueJS? So I want to talk a little bit about Vue. Again, my hope is to introduce Vue to some of you who may not be familiar with it. But I want to talk a little bit more about just building for the web. There's something really great about building for the web. And I don't know about you, but I think a lot of us would probably start out building on the web. And I think one of the things I really love is just that instant gratification, right? Like you can fire up a HTML document, you can put some content in there, some markup, and you have something ready to go. And now with tools like Netlify, you can just throw something on the web for free, and it's just like really quick, that instant gratification. So I really love building for the web. And one of those frameworks that have really kind of brought me back into it is Vue. Just because, it does something that Spring did, and that is it just makes all the hard things really easy to do. So what I want to do is hopefully introduce you to Vue, and then we'll talk about how we're going to combine the two together. So let's talk about what VueJS is. So I really have a love-hate relationship with JavaScript. It started out as definitely one of those, did not like that language when I first started out 20 some years ago. There used to be the funny books that were this big, and then the good parts book that was this big, because there wasn't a lot of good parts to JavaScript. It wasn't easy to use. It wasn't very friendly, but you needed it if you wanted to add some kind of interactivity to the web. But then something came along, and that was jQuery. And jQuery kind of reinvigorated my love for building for the web and front-end development. And that's because it made all the hard things easy. If you tried to write an XML HTTP request before jQuery, it was just such a pain in the butt. Then jQuery came along and said $.get, and you can go ahead and fetch some data from the server. Or if you wanted to go ahead and update something in the DOM, $.whatever, right? So it just made everything so much easier. And that's when I really fell back in love with JavaScript. And then Vue came along and kind of did that for me again. Now it kind of gave me a modern way to build applications. The big thing we're going to talk about, though, is the progressive JavaScript framework. So you're going to hear that word when Vue is talked about. But what does that really mean? So what this means is that we can incrementally adopt Vue as we go along. We can go ahead and open up a single page, drop in a script tag, start working on it, and we have some new interactivity or enhancements to our web page. As your needs grow, you can go ahead and opt into the entire tool chain or things like routing and state management, but you don't need to do that right off the bat. You pick the right tool for the right job. And it's one of my favorite things about Vue. So what's on my agenda for today? Ice cream is always on my agenda. Big fan of ice cream. And you'll see as we get into this what I mean, but some of my demos are built around an ice cream shop. And we're going to go into kind of three areas of Spring Boot and VueJS. First, we're going to talk about progressive Vue. We just kind of mentioned it, but what if I have an existing application that I just want to go ahead and add some interactivity to and enhance that page? How do I do that? Then there's a whole nother side of this, and that is, well, what if I want to build a full front-end application using VueJS and I want to use Spring Boot on the back end. Maybe it's just serving up some REST APIs. Maybe it's doing a whole bunch of other things. There are really two approaches to this. One is a monolithic approach where we're kind of combining everything together. The other approach is, hey, we have this standalone Vue application, which is a single page application, and it's reaching out to our standalone, either monolithic Spring Boot application or many microservices. Could be a distributed application in the cloud using something like API Gateway, could be anything. So these are really the things I want to cover today as far as working with Spring Boot and Vue. So let's start with the progressive view. So progressive view, the definition of progressive is happening or developing gradually or in stages, proceeding step by step. So I want you to think about something. This is, again, a really great way to introduce Vue into an existing code base. If you were to go to your manager and say, hey, I saw this talk from Dan Vega, and I really think we should drop everything we're doing and rewrite our whole entire application in Vue and use Spring Boot on the back end, I think she's going to be pretty upset with you. That's not a great way to introduce Vue. But if you came to her and said, hey, I have this great idea. This one page over here on our shopping cart, there's some things that are kind of clunky, doesn't really work. I saw this idea, we can just drop Vue in on that one page and add some cool things to it. And that's a much easier buy-in from a manager. So you can do that, get your team excited about Vue, and then incrementally adopt it across your application. And then maybe one day, maybe it is a scenario where we either want to rewrite this one or start a new application using Vue. So that's what we're going to start with today. And we're going to start with this application. So I've written a little bit of a ice cream store online demo. And what this, I'm sitting around one night getting ready to go to a place called Mitchell's here in the Cleveland area, which is a really great place for ice cream. And I was looking at their website and I kind of modeled this after it, but I thought, hey, this would be a great idea for just a quick little demo. So let's go ahead and exit out of here. And we're going to go over to IntelliJ and we're going to talk about this demo. So we're going to incrementally add some things. But what I want to do first is just kind of walk you around this application and let you know what this existing application does, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is open up this POM. And if you look at it, it's using Java 16. Doesn't really matter on that front. You can use whatever version of Java. But as Josh said this morning, there's no reason for us to really be on Java 8. So let's try and move to more recent versions of Java. So we also have Timeleaf as a dependency and web. And that's really all there is to it. We're going to say that this existing application that we're working with is just a MVC app, a Spring Web MVC app, and it uses Timeleaf for templating. And then if we go over into our controller, we have this shopping cart controller. So you can see this is marked with an add controller annotation. So what that means is when we go ahead and return something like index.html, that is going to look for that Timeleaf template in the templates directory and one called index.html. So all we're doing here is we have, if you remember from the UI, there's a cart count, how many items are in our count, and a list of products. We're calling these scoops. And so I have a product service that finds these by category. I don't have a database in place. In my service class, I just have a list of products that I've instantiated here and added a few products here in the constructor. So I have an in-memory representation of 6 products. The shopping cart controller is going to go ahead and add those to an attribute called scoops and return the index.html. So another thing I kind of put in here is an add to cart. So if you have all these products listed and click add to cart, I kind of simulated what the server side project usually reminds me of. And that's I click a button and I wait a few seconds and I wait a few more and then something's returned to me. And nowhere during that submission do I know that something's going on or something's being saved. And sometimes I don't even know if anything happened at the end of that. So I know that's not the case for everything, but this is just kind of my simulation of what that looks like. So over here under resources, under templates, you can see that we have an index.html. There is some Tailwind. I have some Tailwind throughout my demos. You're either a fan or you're not, no big deal, but I'm a big fan of Tailwind. So I'm using that here to just kind of make it pretty. So there really isn't much going on here. We do iterate over each of the products that we returned in our model, and then we have an action to go ahead and add to cart. So what I want to do is actually just fire this application up real quick, head back to our browser, and we'll go to localhost 8080. Whoops. Localhost 8080. And if everything looks good, now what I can do is go ahead and click on add to cart. You see that familiar submitting, hey, something saved, and it took a little bit. So what I want to do is kind of change that application. I want to do a little bit of enhancing to that application. And so let's talk about how we can make that happen. We must go on. So I'm just going to kind of catch you up. We are in a product controller. We had a JavaScript file here that during a lifecycle hook is going to reach out and call an API/products endpoint, and we're going to get some JSON back. We created this controller. This controller is very simple. It gets a dependency here injected of type product service, and we use this to list out all of the products. So we're going to head back over to our application now. We should be able to start it up. So let's go ahead and run this. And if we go ahead and refresh this, now what we should see, hopefully, we're not there yet. Let's go ahead and come back. Sorry about that. So we have our product controller and we have our index.html. Sorry, we have one more thing we need to do. Here in the form, before we just have our single form, right? What we need to do is we need to iterate over that. So we're going to iterate over each of those products that comes back. And we're going to do that using the v4 product in products. We also are using a method of type post, and we're going to do something to submit this, go ahead and submit this product using a function called add to cart, but we'll do that in a second. For right now, what I'm going to focus in is, hey, we're going to get all of those products that are in the array, iterate over them, and go ahead and display them. So let's go ahead and run our application again. We'll stop and rerun. And now if we go ahead and refresh this, we can see our products. So now we've done that first step, which is kind of just listing out all of those products. Now we can't actually add those to the cart yet, but we'll get to that. One thing I want to mention is if you're doing any Vue development, there's a really great Chrome extension. There's also one for all the other browsers, I believe. But it's called the Vue Dev Tools. And this will really give you some insight into your application. So down here, we can see there's a bunch of variables going on. And we can see things like, here's our products array. So we do go out and fetch all of that data when this component is loaded. And you can see here's each of those products in the array. So the Vue Dev Tools is something that's really handy to have. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. What I'm going to do is I'm on a particular branch. I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to commit these so I can switch over to something else. Live demos are always so much fun. All right, we're going to go ahead and commit that. Probably should have committed that anyway. And now what I can do is I'm going to go ahead and switch to another branch I have called add to cart. And we're just going to look at a couple more things here. So now back in my main.js, I've added one thing. So we had this reactive data before. I've added this method for on add to cart, which is going to get the current event passed to us. It'll give us a way to get whatever that current product is. It'll do some things like say, hey, this product is now saving, which will give us a little like spinner icon on our button, just notifying the user, a little bit of enhancement to let the user know that, hey, something is going on here we are saving something. And what we'll do now is we'll use async await again. We're going to use the fetch method to go out and post something to /API/cart. We're going to go ahead and send the body in as whatever that product is, and we're just going to use json.stringify to kind of create that JSON. When we get back, we'll say it's done being saved. Go ahead and update the cart total. And then I don't want to change this to 5. We'll just kind of leave that info panel up that says, hey, something was saved. And again, back from our template before, the way that this happens is when we loop over that, we had this event handler. So this @submit, it's a shorthand for saying, hey, this is an event handler for submit event. But I also have a modifier on there for preventing. I want to prevent the default behavior of submitting a form, which would be to go ahead and post it to something else, right? So when you do that, call that onAddToCart function that we've created in main.js. So let's go ahead and see if we can go ahead and complete this story on the progressive view side. And I always have this happen when I switch. I need to delete this target. And we should be okay now. So we're going to fire this up. Hopefully this runs now. And if we go back to our browser, so again, now we don't have that info panel at the top. We have all of our products listed out. And what we want to do is go ahead and click on the add to cart. You'll see that nice indicator that, hey, something's happening. Then we get that back. That product was saved successfully. And after 5 seconds, we're going to go ahead and remove that. And here in the upper right, you see that we have one item added to our cart. So far, so good. This was a nice way to go ahead and add some interactivity to an existing application without having to rewrite that entire application. So let's go ahead and jump back over here. One thing I want to mention is there's a new project in the Vue space called Petite Vue. And this is exactly for the situation that we just walked through. And it's basically an alternative distribution of Vue optimized for progressive enhancement. The big thing here is it's only 5.8 kilobytes. So if you're just doing something like adding some interactivity to a page, this is a really great option. Just drop it on your page and go. Again, it's what I love about the web, that instant gratification. And it does a lot of things that the Vue CDN, the full Vue CDN can do. There are some differences, but if you take a look at Petite Vue, it kind of lists those out for you. Okay, so I want to talk about our monolithic application now. So we just looked at an example of how to drop in some functionality into an existing app. But what if you want to start a brand new application with Spring Boot and Vue? What would that look like? So there are really two approaches to this, as I mentioned earlier in the talk. First, we're going to look at the monolithic approach. And a software system is called monolithic if it has monolithic architecture. This is where functionally distinguishable aspects are all kind of interwoven together rather than separating those out. So in this case, we're going to have one Spring Boot application where our Vue application is tucked inside. And at the end of the day, we build up one single deployable asset. So let's talk about some pros and cons to this approach. As with everything, you have to weigh your options. I often tell people when you're deciding which approach to take on this side, it really comes down to weighing some pros and cons. And a lot of the times it is, how is your team made up? So let's start with the pros. When we're done, when we're ready to move this to production, we have a single deployable jar, which is fantastic. Everything is ready to go. It's in one jar, one asset to deploy. That makes it pretty easy. Simplicity can be a couple of different things. It can be from a developer standpoint. Hey, here's one repo that you have to go pull, or open up your IDE, and all your code is right there. Performance can be a pro because, hey, you don't have to go across the wire to grab data. So if you're not having that extra hop, that can be definitely a performance gain. There are some cons though. Just like there's a pro of having a single deployable jar, it can be a con as well. Now I have this one jar. What if I just want to change the front end? Well, you can't. You have to change the entire application and redeploy the entire application, right? So that can be a con. And there's always, issues with tight coupling. coupling effects management, scalability, continuous deployment, and there could be more things that kind of come out of that tight coupling. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to do two things. One, we're going to create a brand new project so I can start fresh and kind of show you how this works. And then if we have time, we'll look at it in the facet of the ice cream store because there's a lot more that's going on in the ice cream store demo that I have for you. So I just want to show you from the beginning. We're just going to use Spring Initializer to create the Spring Boot project. We're going to use this really great build tool called Vite. Vite is a framework agnostic build tool that uses ES Build, which is written in Go behind the scenes. It's super fast. You can use it for just your vanilla JS projects, Vue, React, Svelte, whatever you want. So that's how we're going to create our Vue project today. And then, as I said, if we have time, we'll go ahead and look at the ice cream store as well. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a new project. So again, I'm going to use the Spring Initializer here inside of IntelliJ. So we're going to call this FS Java. And I think I can get this out of here. We're going to use Vega, and we're going to use Java 16. Again, you can use whatever version of Java you like. And we only need one dependency here, which is the web dependency. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish this window. And the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and open this up. Go ahead and look at, we have our FS Java application. All right. The first thing that we want to do is actually create a package, and we're going to create a controller. And I'm going to create a controller called message controller. And inside of here, I don't think we actually need those. I don't know where that was coming from, but we have a message controller here. This is not the one I want. No, message controller. There we go. Okay, so now we have a message controller. This is a really simple REST controller. There's a request mapping for /API/messages. And so if we end up hitting that and /hello, we're just going to return a string. And so what I want to do is first just test this. We can go ahead and run the application here in IntelliJ. And then what I like to do is just so we could always pop over to the browser if we wanted to and hit that endpoint. One thing I like to do here in IntelliJ is go ahead and use this generate request in the HTTP client. So I can just say, hey, I want to go ahead and get messages /hello. And looks like I already had that before, but we'll go ahead and run this. And looks like we have a bad request. Let me try this one more time. We should have, we want to generate it from here too. So there we go. We weren't prepending the localhost 8080, so that might help. So now if we go ahead and run this, we get the text return full stack Java with Spring Boot. So this is very simple, but I want to start out with this because this is the endpoint that we're going to pull into our Vue application. So let's go ahead and stop our Spring application. We're going to close a couple of these things. And what I'm going to do is open up terminal. So if I didn't have a snafu and the demo gods were with me, I would spend some time looking at the Vite website and just talk a little bit more about Vite as a build tool, but we'll kind of skip that for now. So what I'm going to do is use Vite to go ahead and create a new application. What I want to do is I want to move into the source directory. And from here, we're going to run npm init Vite at latest. And what it's going to do is allow us to create a new Vite project, and we're going to give it a name. I'm going to just call this front end. We're going to use the Vue framework. So again, you can use any of these that you'd like. You can use TypeScript if you like. I'm just going to use JavaScript here. And that's it. That was very quick. We've created a Vue project. I'll show you the front end folder in a second, but we can cd into front end as the directions tell us to. We can run npm install. You see that this is very, very fast. Any other projects that you've kind of had to npm install on maybe takes a while. There's very few dependencies. And then we can run npm run dev if we wanted to, and you see that it starts up like that on localhost 3000. So I'm going to stop it for a second though, and just look here in source. So we do have a front end. And the one thing I want to do here is here in app.vue, I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this, and we're just going to save some time here. Glad I set these live templates up today. So we have just a template here that it's going to display a message. I'm using Vue 3's script setup. Again, more on that in the documentation. I don't want to dive into that on short time here. And what we can do then is we can go ahead and on the mounted hook, we're going to go ahead and call that API messages hello endpoint. And we're going to set that value to whatever the response's text is. So we're going to pull that text back. So I have one more quick change to make here, and that is just the Vite config. We're going to say, hey, anytime you hit /API, we want to proxy that onto localhost 8080. So now what we're doing here, let's talk about the two kind of separate applications that you're running in development. So in development, I'm running this simple VueJS application that's available on port 3000. And I'm also going to go ahead and run the Spring Boot application that is available on 8080. When I go back to my browser, I'm going to go ahead and hit localhost 3000. And there is our message. So that is getting returned from the Spring Boot backend. So this is great for development. But what I mentioned before is one of the keys to this approach is that we are creating a single deployable jar. So how are we doing that now? Well, the way that we're going to do that is we're going to come in here. I'm going to set a couple things up. Let's say versions. So I'm just setting up a version of Node and NPM. I'm going to go ahead and paste some stuff into here. We can talk about this. Again, with a little more time, I would have went back to the website for you. There is a really great Maven plugin. It's called the front end Maven plugin. And what this will do, it'll allow us to install Node and NPM. So inside of Vite, which is just a Vue application, there's a command to build an application. So if you're on npm run build, it will basically take everything and put it into a dist folder. These are your production ready assets. What we're doing with this Maven plugin is saying, I want you to run that build command. And then what I want you to do is copy all of that information. Well, where are you going to copy it to? Well, here's our source front end. I want you to use the Maven source resources plugin to go ahead and copy the Vue front end into the Spring Boot target static folder. So in target classes static, that's where if the index.html is there, that is going to be the first thing that's served up. So with all of this in place, I'm going to go ahead and refresh the Maven dependencies here. What I'm going to do is come back over to the terminal. I'm going to stop everything that's going on, and I'm going to move back one. So we're in, should be in there. So now we can go ahead and run MVN, so Maven clean package. What we want to do here is we're creating an executable jar, but part of that Maven, part of that clean or package process is going to be now to run those build processes in which we're copying that stuff into the target folder. So this is just kind of like a Maven clean. Normally when we're packaging, we're going to get this snapshot jar here. So this is just like that, but now our assets are in there. So now what we can do is go ahead and run java-jar, and we have our fs java snapshot. So now this is going to put everything together. You see that that started up pretty quickly. And if I go to 8080, here's our application running all together. So that is how we can do it, from scratch. I do want to switch over to this ice cream store real quick, just to show it to you. We won't actually run it because we are getting low on time, but this is a full application in that same context. So if you head over to GitHub and pull that code down, you can look at a much more complete application. So if we look at the Vue side of things, if we go ahead and look at package.json, we have some dependencies on Vue router and Vuex. So again, we're buying into the entire tool chain. We have state management, we have routing. If you look under source, we have a lot more things going on here. So we have our router, we have our route set up here, we have our store, which is our state management. We're using this to track the number of cart items in the cart. We have an app.view that relegates to the router. And then we have all these components for things like the info bar, the product list, the site footer, and the site header. So yeah, not much more to say there. This is the exact same setup that we just went through, but using that ice cream store model now, everything should just go ahead and work. Maybe I will go ahead and try and run this if we can. So this is, well, let's go ahead and do this. So I would have to go ahead and start both of those. So let's do what we just did before. Even clean package. Let's see. So this, again, this application uses the same technique that we just used. So it's going to build us a jar that contains all of our static assets. So this is going to contain the Vue application, but this time we're going to have things like routing and state management. And so there we go. We get an ice cream store jar. So I'm going to go ahead and run java-jar target ice cream store. And this should go ahead and start up our application. Again, this is our monolithic application, so everything's kind of going to be put together for us. So now we have some routing here. We have these different pages. We have our cart over here. Order online. This is our home page. This is where we can kind of add items to the cart. I'm going to go ahead and click add item. There wasn't a delay in there. I just instantly added it to the cart, although we could have forced the delay to kind of make it look like the previous example. But as you see, every time this is added, we go ahead and update this cart item to 3. And that's all there is to it. So that's everything in one application, in our monolithic application there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And what I'm going to do is jump back to my presentation and just talk about the last one, which is our single page application. So a single page application is really a web application or website that interacts with the user by dynamically rewriting the current web page. So what are the pros and cons to this approach? So first off, a pro is 2 deployable assets. You'll see this listed as a pro and a con again. The pro is that, hey, if that scenario that comes up where I need to just change the front end, you can do that without disrupting the back end. The pro on that too is you have loose coupling with each other. The con is you have 2 assets that you have to deploy. It gets a little bit more complex. Performance can be an issue. And then you'll see over here on the right, I have 2 different code bases, the back end and the front end. I can go ahead and pull those into one particular web project here. I'm going to just show this real quick and then we'll be done. Not actually going to run this, but I just do want to show this. So here in IntelliJ, I've created a blank web project and added the backend and the front end as modules. The one thing that you want to be conscious of when you're creating just a backend with no front end here is when we go to reach out to that product controller, one thing we're going to be wary of is we're talking on 2 different ports, 3000 and 8080, right? So that's when CORS comes into play. You got to make sure you have cross origin on your product controller. If you don't want to have to go ahead and start up your applications with 2 separate scripts, like run the Maven script, run the NPM script, you can always throw something in your project here that does it both for you. So I have a small shell script that just says, hey, go ahead and run the front end project, and then go ahead and start up Spring Boot and run the back end project. So this will kind of put those two together. So I think that is all I have. Sorry, I had to kind of flow through some of the end of the presentation a little bit quicker, but all the assets, again, are on my website in that blog post. And hopefully you'll join me over in the Q&A and we can go ahead and answer any questions that you might have. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That was super informative. And thank you for working through those technical difficulties in the middle. Also, thanks to all the attendees for sticking around and being patient. Next up, we have Kwasi Mensah and Michael McMahon from Oracle, and they will be talking about the making of the Oracle R2DBC driver. I'll turn it over to Kwasi and Michael.